Archaeologist. But in the early 1990s, I was introduced to Augustine through 4 short articles he published in 1938 in the Pennsylvania Archaeologist and a follow-up in 1940. In these articles, he wrote about village sites and rock shelters that he excavated in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, while working as a New Deal archaeologist during the Great Depression. When I researched circular villages of the Monongahela tradition, I was at first simply interested in the findings he and his team made through the second half of the 1930s and into the 1940s. But as I read his daily reports and correspondence, Augustine's personality shined through, and I became curious about the man himself. Augustine was the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, archaeologist that directed the Somerset County New Deal excavations after the WPA was created. There had been some earlier excavations that he was not involved with, as near as I can tell. So he suddenly becomes an archaeologist with no apparent prior background. But when you read Augustine's reports, it's very clear that he knew how to do archaeology. What about his background made him a good fit for running these excavations? Based on his thorough and complete records, he clearly was a good archaeologist, even an exceptional one by the standards of the times. Why did he stop doing archaeology shortly after the New Deal ended? Some of these questions I can answer after 2 decades of research. Others are mysteries lost to the mist of time itself. I did contact Edgar Augustine's son, Edgar Augustine Jr., who is still alive in 2000, but sadly is no longer with us. I agree with his son that he probably got his job leading the WPA excavations through a personal connection with banker John Skull of Somerset, who was very active in local heritage in the 1920s and 1930s. But Augustine Jr. was not able to shed light on his father's own background or even interest in archaeology prior to the WPA. Incidentally, in this photograph, this is one of 2 that I have of Edgar Augustine Sr., both taken at the Hannah site. He's the gentleman in the center. The younger man who's on the left, when you're looking at the photograph, apparently is a crew member, but whose name I've never been able to discover. And the one on the far right, the elderly gentleman, is a guy by the name of Marshall Turney, and we'll get back to him in just a little bit. We don't have that many pictures of Edgar Augustine because he was usually the man behind the camera. This is the other picture of Augustine, clearly taken the same day, but the younger man is swapped out for an unknown individual, probably another crew member. In an accompanying letter dated October 8, 1935, Augustine tells Donald Cadzow, then state archaeologist, that he will begin running the WPA work in Somerset County shortly for a project slated to only last 3 months. This was wrong. The project lasted over 4 years, although not continuously. Running a WPA archaeology project was as much, if not more, about keeping people working as actually doing archaeology. Much of Augustine's time was spent dealing with personnel issues. The first few weeks of the WPA project involved the testing of various small sites and even the investigation on a disturbed historic graveyard. His first village site excavations under the WPA were at the Hannah site beginning on November 12, 1935, one of 3 type sites used to define the Monongahela tradition. Note the younger man simply standing in the field watching people at work. Augustine had a dry wit, and this showed up regularly in his daily posts. Here he notes that one of his workers feigned ill health in the morning. This man was later fired for his poor work ethic. But Augustine was also very concerned about the health and well-being of his workers. Marshall Turney, the older man in these first images, was 80 years old and challenged by the winter excavations at the Hannah site. He did not last the duration of the season. Augustine's daily field reports sometimes waxed poetic, showing that he was skilled not just in archaeology but interpreting the past. Here he notes, talking about the location of the Hannah site, quote, "The location of the site on the knoll between the Castleman River and White's Creek is ideal. The river furnished transportation, fish, and protection. The smaller creek provided fresh water and protection from attack on the west side of the village. The hills at the rear were wooded beyond the small clearing planted in beans, corn, and tobacco, and provided a variety of fresh meat for the hunters." He continually stressed concern over the health of men, especially during the winter months, telling them to dress warmly. Losing workers could also endanger a project. Of course, the men might be absent for non-health reasons, such as the first day of deer season. Augustine obviously worked to interpret his findings, noting, for example, that points seemed high in frequency at the Hannah site, given that the village was not fortified. He also notes that he would not ask his men to do anything he was unwilling to do, showing the traits one would associate with a good field supervisor. In his bid to keep his men warm for at least part of the day, Augustine purchased some canvas to cut down on the winter winds knifing through the site. The barrels in the center of the picture were also used as a makeshift stove. Augustine also employed various techniques to deal with winter excavations, such as placing sticks in excavated post holes and other features to keep track of them for later mapping. Again, with his dry wit, he attributed all the smoking pipes found at the Hannah site to smokers who regularly lost their pipes. Augustine was always concerned about the quality of his work and tried to regularly, and often to no avail, to get state archaeologist Donald Katz out to visit the sites he was excavating and review his work. To keep his men working regularly, Augustine always made sure he had at least one site ready after the current site was done, sometimes dealing with temperamental landowners, a problem that unfortunately has never gone away. Being modest and having a self-deprecating sense of humor, Augustine addressed his letters to Cazo as Archaeologist number 1 and signed himself as Archaeologist .0000000000000. Thinking was hard enough, but sometimes it was a challenge even to get to the site, as we can see here. Augustine clearly recognized that archaeology is not just about finding stuff, even if you have a dog for help. As he notes here, quote, "The good digger is one who can dig for a week and find nothing at all," close quote. Contrary to WPA practices, Augustine fought to keep at least some of the crew together as he moved from one site to another across Somerset County. Workers were supposed to come from the immediate locality of his site, but he knew that his work would be better with at least some seasoned laborers, and he used his own car for this purpose. Augustine regularly had to contend with landowners. Flora Black was one prominent individual who insisted his crew dig on her land. Although skeptical at first, he tested the land anyhow, only to find a village site. Pay was low for Augustine and his men, and he regularly worried about making payroll. During downtime between projects, Augustine used his own car, which he nicknamed Flivver after a popular radio show, to travel around Somerset County with a small crew, scouring the landscape for sites ready when funding levels increased again. Funding was not only one issue to contend with, so was politics. Augustine, though a registered Republican, had to ask for Democrat sponsors to release some funding, but ironically, his work would later be held up for nearly a year because Republican county commissioners did not want a relief project that would make FDR look good in the county. Working during all kinds of weather, Augustine and his men maintained a small shelter where they could take breaks from blustery winter winds. They spent their lunch times partly looking for wood or scavenging coal that fell off trains, the latter an illegal activity. In his letter, Augustine lays out very succinctly how a project should be carried out, and that both supervisors and excavators needed to have at least a rudimentary idea of what they should expect to find. As he and his crew worked too far to make commuting feasible, Augustine and his handpicked core team began to take on the hospitality of landowners, filling up on spare ribs and chicken with the Emmerichs. Augustine's notes are occasionally filled with his illustrations, such as these pipes, in some cases all that remains of the artifacts themselves. His commentary sometimes took on a more ribald tone. Here he talks about a bone that male raccoons have, and how the female typists who typed his field records might react to said bones. Travel again took him further and further from home to northern Somerset County, but at least he was full of sauerkraut and sausages at the Powell family farm. Things were a bit dire with the year-long break that followed a prematurely truncated investigation of the March Rock Shelter sites. On a somewhat surreal note, Augustine worked to reconstruct a Monongahela village on the grounds of Bushy Run battlefield. What might archaeologists today think when they find the traces of this site? Reconstructing the past got into Augustine's blood, as seen in these two dwelling reconstructions at Fort Hill. Fort Hill was the last major village site Augustine worked on, and other than helping prepare a report that was never published, his archaeology career ended in the early 1940s. New Deal funding dried up as war loomed, and he had to take over the family farm on the death of his brother. He stayed interested in archaeology and would apparently regularly give presentations in the post-war years, as glass slides donated to the Somerset Historical Society show. Some of these slides are sadly in poor shape. The fractured nature of this image reflects the fragility of our documentation of the past and those who carried out the work. If you want to know more, find my chapter in the Shovel Ready book. The title gave editors a nightmare. Thank you.